Hi, my name is Callie Chappelle, and thanks for watching this video, Introduction to the Disadvantage, Part 1, The Basics. This is part of a series of videos I'm doing, part of the Novice Go Fight Win Debate series that's aimed at teaching novices how to do policy debate. So let's get started. Again, my name is Callie Chappelle. I'm a debater for the University of Michigan. I debated for Traverse City Central High School. I'm a 2A, 1N. And fun fact about me is that I like to disguise disadvantages as on-case arguments. But that's pretty advanced, and we'll get to that in the future. So, to make the most out of these videos, you should take notes and rewatch bits that you need re-explained. Hopefully, we'll have worksheets and or supplemental materials that will go along with the video, so definitely check out the video description. Just a disclaimer, you don't need to memorize it all, but at least being familiar with terms that I introduce in the video is a great way to begin. It's a building process. And your coach may like things differently, or you may like to debate in a different style. If you like to do performance or identity arguments, or just read a poem or express yourself differently, that's totally great. The reason why I'm focusing on this version of debate as a starting point is frankly because that's the way that I was taught. I totally respect other forms of debate, and if you want more info, you should definitely add it to the comment, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible with more resources. Alright, so how to win on the negative. Essentially, you have to prove that doing the affirmative is worse than doing nothing at all, or the status quo. So, you have to prove the status quo is better than the AF plan. In other words, you have to prove that the disadvantages of the plan are better than the advantages of the plan. So, here's some vocab that you need to know. Defensive versus offensive argument. So, defensive arguments is saying that your impact isn't as bad as you think. So, here, if you look at this continuum, here's the AF does nothing, and here's the AF is good, and here's the AF is bad. So we start here, AF is good, out of the 1AC, right? So the 1AC proves that the AF is good. So when you read impact defense, then you have to bring it down to AF does nothing, right? So that's just saying, for example, if the AF says the U.S.-China war will cause extinction, and the neg says U.S.-China war will only be minor, and international actors will stop the impact from escalating, that moves from the AF being good for preventing this war to doing nothing, or like in this range of like doing very little. Right? So here's offensive arguments. That's saying that your plan makes a bad thing happen. So for example, the AF might say we need to increase solar energy to stop global warming. So we're up here. And the neg says building solar panels requires a lot of energy, so you actually cause global warming. Okay, so instead of going from AF is good, it goes all the way to AF is bad. Okay, so disadvantages are an example of an offensive argument. Okay, so one way that I like to tell novices to think about this is defensive arguments are if you ask yourself, is it better than the status quo? And the answer is it's the same as the status quo, then it's a defensive argument. Or if you ask yourself, is doing the AF plan make it worse than the status quo? Then that's an offensive argument. Okay? So what is a disadvantage or a disad? A DA, or disadvantage or disad, is an off-case position that explains why the effects of the plan are bad. So you compare the disadvantage to the plan's advantage to prove the plan is worse than doing nothing at all, or it was worse than the status quo. So I'm going to show you kind of this metaphor of a person standing on a cliff to explain a disad and also parts of the disad. So a disad can be thought of as this person standing on a cliff. Okay, so the parts of the disad. There are three parts of a disad: uniqueness, link, and impact. So I'm going to explain this in terms of a very easy plan to understand. Let's go to McDonald's. So the 1AC is just like, let's go to McDonald's, and the advantage, there's just one, is that I'm hungry and I can buy food there, okay? So let's talk about each part individually kind of at a big level, and then we'll focus in on each one. Okay, so there are three parts, and you should be taking very close notes because this is very important and sometimes requires a couple of exposures to fully get down. So there are three parts. The first is uniqueness. Why the bad thing the plan will cause, the impact, isn't happening now. This is a description of the status quo. So in this case, it would be I already wasn't planning on going to McDonald's, right? So showing this metaphor, the uniqueness would mean the person will not jump off the cliff unless pushed. So right now the person is standing on the edge of the cliff, but they're not moving, right? Okay, so the link is how the plan causes something bad to happen. So if I go to McDonald's, I will get salmonella, okay? So if I go to McDonald's, then I'll get salmonella. So here, if you look at the metaphor again, the link would mean that the plan comes up and pushes the person off the cliff, okay? So something happens to make a bad thing happen, and that's the link, okay? The plan causes something bad to happen, fall off the cliff. Okay, and the last part is the impact. So that's how the bad thing causes extinction or some kind of other negative impact. So in this the McDonald's example, it would be if I get salmonella, all my friends will contract it, and then everyone will get it, and then every single person in the entire world will die. So with this metaphor again, the impact would mean the person hits the bottom of the canyon really hard. See, there he is, down there, lying down at the bottom of the canyon. Okay, so we're going to talk about them more in depth, but that's the big idea. So if I was explaining the story of the Disad, or all parts, I would say, the plan is let's go to McDonald's, and I'd say I wasn't planning on going to McDonald's, but if the plan happens, then I have to go to McDonald's, and that'll cause me to get salmonella, and if I get salmonella, then everybody will get it in the entire world, and we'll all die. Okay? So it sounds pretty silly, but it makes a lot more sense in a debate round. So let's look at each part in more detail. So the example that we're going to use is the spending DA, okay? So the big idea of the spending DA is the plan spends money, and if the plan spends money, then that means that the government is spending money, and that causes a bad perception of U.S. spending by other countries and investors, which means that they're less likely to invest in the U.S. So this makes sense, right? So, for example, given the current political climate, if Obama is just like, yeah, we're gonna fund this huge aquaculture program that's gonna cost billions and billions of dollars, investors are gonna be like, yeah, right, we have so much unemployment, we have so many other things we need to spend money on. This is ridiculous that the U.S. is spending money on this kind of ancillary aquaculture program. So that's the big idea. So we're going to talk about it in terms of debate, right? So uniqueness. What is uniqueness again? Pause the video if you can't remember what it is. You should rewatch it. It is why the link or internal link isn't triggered in the status quo. So it's usually the opposite of the problem you're saying the plan causes. So for example, if you're saying that the plan causes the economy to decrease, uniqueness would say the economy is high now. Okay? So uniqueness is your interpretation of the status quo. So why would we want to say that things aren't happening now? Because, keep in mind, to win on the negative, you have to win that doing nothing is better than doing the plan. Now, if the negative thing that the plan causes is already happening in the status quo, then we're not proving that doing nothing is better than the plan. We're just saying that doing nothing and the plan are just as bad. So you have to prove, using uniqueness, that the plan is uniquely bad compared to the status quo. So a symbol when you're flowing is a circled U. And an example with a spending Disad is currently there is no spending to increase exploration and or development of the Earth's oceans, contextual to the AF. If you're reading the aquaculture AF, then it would be aquaculture. So there's no aquaculture spending now. Okay, so how do you debate uniqueness? There are three big arguments that you can make on uniqueness that are really generic for like any uniqueness debate. First is the importance of recency. If you're describing what's happening now in the status quo, make sure you're presenting the newest description of now. If your evidence is newer, you can say that your evidence assumes their answers. So let's start with the first sentence here. So if you're trying to describe what's happening in the status quo, you better have an accurate description of the status quo. And obviously, a description of the status quo from 2011 is going to be very different, especially regarding spending, than a description of the status quo yesterday. So, second part of this, if your evidence is newer, you can say that your evidence assumes their answers. So, I forgot to change this, but like if they say that any old ocean spending spent a lot of money too, and your evidence is newer, saying that the economy is good, even though old ocean spending was expensive, it still shows that we're on the brink of triggering the impact. So even if other things should have triggered it in the past, the fact that they haven't, the fact that we have newer evidence that indicates how the status quo is now, means that we assume those answers already, okay? That just wasn't bad enough, but in this case, it uniquely will be bad. That's the link, okay? The second is predictive evidence. So instead of presenting a snapshot of what's happening now, you want to have evidence that predicts what's going to happen in the future. Now, why is this? Because realistically, the AF is not going to happen right away, right? So I'm not going to snap my fingers, judge votes AF, and suddenly we have aquaculture. No, there's going to be implementation in the future, and obviously policies are going to change. So for the AF to solve over the long term, the AF needs to be able to work in the long term, right? So let's say we have evidence that says the economy is good now, but the other team says the economy may be good now, but it's going to collapse in the future. If the economy collapses, then that'll implicate whether or not aquaculture will actually work in the long term. So we need to have predictive evidence to be able to keep into account kind of how long-term impacts will influence the Disad or the AF uniquely. And finally, we can make the argument that uniqueness controls the direction of the link. So who cares how the plan changes what's happening now if the way they describe now is wrong, right? So that's the biggest idea. So it doesn't matter kind of whether the plan like has a certain perception on investors, whether or not investors want to spend in the U.S. or not based on the plan, if the U.S. economy is already terrible, right? So if you win the U.S. economy is good, then there's only a risk of a link. It's not really dependent on, it's more dependent on uniqueness than the link. Okay, this is like a more advanced concept, so if you don't entirely understand uniqueness controlling the direction of the link, you should definitely talk to your coaches about it, or send me an email, or ask about it in the comment section, and I'll try to include more information in the future. The two biggest things that you as novices should understand is recency and predictive evidence. Okay, so link. What is a link? Think back to when we talked about it previously. Okay, so the link is how the plan changes the status quo in a negative way. So it's a circled L. So the link and the spending DA is the plan spends a bunch of money. So what was the uniqueness again? Think about it. The uniqueness was the economy is high now and that spending is not, there's no new spending on the AF plan, okay? But the link is the plan spends a bunch of money. All right, so two big things when debating the link. First is specificity and second is credentials. So specificity, you should make your link as specific as possible to the plan. So what is better, this is an open question to you, about saying specifically funding aquaculture triggers the impact versus any funding to ocean development triggers the impact or triggers the link? Well, if it's any funding to ocean development, let's say that we also have an increase in in offshore wind power, right? So hypothetically, if not associated with the plan, if offshore wind just happens in the status quo, that would cause the Disad to happen, right, in the status quo without the plan. That is a reason why the world of the status quo isn't better than the world of the AF, right? Because the Disad's going to happen in the status quo regardless of whether or not the AF happens. So that's why it's better that you say specifically only the AF would cause this, so other things won't trigger the impact. So those arguments are actually called thumpers, but you don't need to know that vocab right now. Usually it's in the context of the politics Disad. And the second thing about debating the link is credentials. So if your evidence is from a credible expert, then that's a reason for the judge to prefer it. Obviously, if your card is from a guy who has a PhD in hydroelectric environmental engineering, that's going to be a lot better than the other piece of evidence that maybe is written by Joe Schmo, the blogger. Okay, there's the next part is the internal link. So the internal link essentially is the crazy chain of impacts that lead to the crazy chain of events that lead to the impact. So the internal link for the spending DA is if the government spends a bunch of money on aquaculture, it's perceived as wasteful spending, which causes companies to downgrade our credit rating, which kills the U.S. economy, and U.S. economic collapse leads to nuclear war. So the symbol here and like how I flow is using an arrow. So I would have this internal link chain flow something like this. So wasteful spending causes downgrade, collapses the U.S. economy, causes nuke war. Except for instead of, if you watch the flowing video, you'll know this, instead of flowing the internal link chain to the side horizontally, I would flow it vertically from up to down with wasteful spending being on the top and nuke war being on the bottom. Okay, so finally last part. What is an impact? It's how we all die. We talked about impact calculus yesterday or in the impact calculus video, but it's essentially the way in which we all die, or it is some other type of impact like dehumanization or racism or patriarchy or something like that. So let's think back. What are the three ways we can compare impacts? What are they? If you said probability, time frame, and magnitude, you'd be right. So before we go on and talk about impact calculus, I just want to give a couple examples of impacts. So like nuclear war causes extinction, global warming causes extinction, biodiversity loss causes extinction, resource wars causes extinction, disease causes extinction. All of these things are examples about how we compare impacts or impacts that we have in debate rounds. So, before we talk about impact calculus, let's just talk about this again. Why do we talk about death impacts? Well, debate is all about looking at the effects of things. So we use debates as a simulation to investigate the relative costs and benefits of an action on a big scale. So if we had debates only with small impacts, such as if we were weighing small economic decline versus increased poverty, it would be really hard to figure out what's worse, right? It would take a lot of kind of judge intervention, and we'd have to rely more on our moral compass, and it would be hard to objectively or somewhat objectively decide what is worse. But in debates with large impacts, for example, if we had complete extinction versus a small war, it's pretty easy to figure out what's worse. So if we're using this to talk about whether the proposed action of the AF plan versus doing nothing in the case of a Disad or doing an alternative action is better, then it's much easier for judges to evaluate, and it's a little bit more fun to kind of hyperbolize the impacts of these actions by using extinction level impacts. So we use hyperbolic impact and extinction scenarios as a method to more easily analyze the potential effects of an action. Plus, talking about and weighing these impacts make debate really fun. Trust me. So I think that this warrants a quick conversation about non-death impacts. So sometimes you'll hear impacts that are like dehumanization or racism or patriarchy, and these are all impacts that are completely relevant and probably honestly more probable and definitely more prevalent and likely and just like more valid impacts than our extinction impacts. What I'm saying in my conversation about death is not to say that those impacts do not matter or not important, but rather to introduce you to some concepts that we use in debate that you may have not already been familiar with. Okay, so here's an impact calc refresher. Magnitude, probability, and time frame. So magnitude, again, is the size of an impact. Probability is the likelihood an impact will happen. And time frame is how quickly the impact will happen. If you're confused or don't remember this impact calculus, just go back, and watch the impact calc video, because I talk about these 3 impact calculuses and ways to weigh impacts and also how to win on each one. And there's also a fun activity that you should definitely do if you haven't done so already. Alright, so here's some new impact vocabulary. Impact outweighs the case. So that's saying that the impact of the Disad is bigger or more important than the impact of the case or the AF plan. So here's an example. Example 1 is this. So the AF impact is that 10 people die if we don't do the plan. The neg impact is every single person in the entire world dies in a blistering inferno if we do the plan. So does Disad outweigh the case? In other words, does every single person dying in a blistering inferno outweigh 10 people dying? I would say yes. Here's another example. AF impact is 10 million people die next year if we don't do the plan. And the neg impact is 400 million people die in 10 years if we do the plan. So does Disad outweigh the case? Well, I don't know. So in the AF, using our impact vocabulary that we already know, 10 million people dying next year would outweigh on time frame, versus with the neg impact, 400 million people dying in 10 years would outweigh in magnitude. Yes, exactly. Alright, so here's the next one. Impact turns a case. This is that the plan actually causes the impacts they're trying to solve for. This is not new. We talked about it in the risk assessment video or the impact calculus video. So if you're confused more about this, you should definitely go back and rewatch the video. It's right at the end where we talk more examples about this. So here are a couple examples. AF, building solar panels causes or solves global warming. And the neg says the energy required to make the solar panels contributes to global warming more than the solar panels would help. So does the Disad turn the case? In other words, does the plan does the neg saying the plan causes the impacts they're trying to solve for? In this case, yes. They're saying that building solar panels actually causes warming, when the AF says that building solar panels solves warming. Okay? Here's another example. So the AF is increasing troop presence in South Korea will prevent a war with North Korea. The neg says increasing troop presence in South Korea will cost a lot of money and collapse the U.S. economy. So does the Disad turn the case? Well, initially, no, right? Because collapsing the economy doesn't inherently mean that we'll have a war with North Korea. However, if the neg went on to explain that increasing troop presence in South Korea will cost a lot of money and collapse the U.S. economy, which means that it'll make other countries perceive the U.S. as a smaller global hegemon, which means that South Asian countries will erupt in a small-scale South and East Asian war, which would pull in North Korea, then yes, the collapse collapse of the U.S. economy may cause a war with North Korea. So sometimes it's not clear cut, right, that if something actually does or does not turn the case. But with a little persuasion, a little bit of explanation, you can explain why an impact that normally wouldn't turn the case actually does. But it just requires a little bit more explanation. So here's a third example for Disad turns the case. So the AF is increasing aquaculture allows for a new food supply, preventing food wars. And the neg says, increasing funding for aquaculture means that the federal government can't fund land-based agriculture subsidies, which means the American agriculture industry, and as opposed to the aquaculture industry, grinds to a, I don't know why it doesn't say halt, but it should say grinds to a halt. So, does the Disad turn the case? In this case, I think you could say yes, because if we don't have American agriculture, then we can't supply all of the places that require American food, which means that it'll directly cause an increased demand in food supply, or a demand for food, which offsets kind of the decreased supply, which means that we are more likely to have food wars, right? Because if we can't produce land-based agriculture, then we will have a lack of food, which means that even if the AF increases aquaculture, which allows for a new food supply, the AF actually causes food wars by decreasing land-based agriculture, okay? So that's just a reason why this Disad would turn the case, but we have to discuss that, right? And you have to be persuasive and around to explain why that happens. So let's practice some impact calculus. Let's compare these two impacts, okay? So AF is global warming caused extinction, and neg is nuclear war caused extinction. So does the Disad outweigh the case? Does the Disad turn the case? And can the Disad turn the case, right? So we have to think about whether, first, does the Disad outweigh the case, right? So the Disad, nuclear war caused extinction, is extinction worse than extinction? No, I don't think that on face the Disad necessarily outweighs the case as far as magnitude, but if we talk about time frame probability, maybe. So nuclear war, would that be in a shorter term than extinction from global warming? Probably. So nuclear war might outweigh on time frame. Now, does nuclear war outweigh on probability? Probably not on face, because global warming we scientifically verify is happening now, versus crazy chain of events would probably have to happen for nuclear war to happen. So even though they're on face the same with magnitude, nuclear war probably has a better time frame, whereas global warming probably has a better probability, okay? So does that turn the case? Does nuclear war cause global warming? Well, it depends. Let's discuss this. The example that I gave in the impact calculus video was that nuclear war would cause increased nitrous oxide emissions, which would cause a depletion of the ozone layer, which would cause global warming. So if you have that analysis, yes, you could say the Disad turns the case, but you need to explain why. And can the Disad turns the case? Well, I just explained that, how nuclear war would cause global warming, right? So yes. All right, we're going to do an impact calculus tournament. And you might be able to do this activity in your class, so you may just want to try to simulate it in your mind. You may just want to skip over it, but I think you can pause this video and practice this. You can use the impacts that are on the impact calculus video, or I can see if I have time, I might post a document with just like impact cards to do this activity. So it's a really fun activity and you should read it. If not, I'm just going to skip over it right now. All right, so things to remember. Magnitude, probability, and time frame. You have to think about what you're winning and how you can explain it to exploit kind of which characteristic is most important. So like, let's say you're winning magnitude, you have to explain why magnitude is better than probability or time frame. Also, you have to think about if it turns case. So does my impact make my opponent's impact happen? So would economic collapse cause a war with China? How would economic collapse turn Chinese war? Okay, so how do you win with the Disad in the end? First, you have to refute every argument, and second, you have to prove the plan is worse than the status quo. Okay, these are the two big things on how to win on a DA. So, coming soon, part 2 and part 3 of the Disad series. Part 2 is going to talk about the Disad debates. So how do you extend a Disad the debate, and then how do you kick out of a Disad? And then part 3 is going to talk about how to answer Disads when you're affirmative. Okay, so I hope this video was helpful, and definitely join me for parts 2 and 3 of this video series. Thanks very much.